British Journal of Sports Medicine, and as you can see, one of our key findings was an evidence practice gap. Now, it seemed pretty silly to only write about that in a journal article when we know it's not making its way to practice. So I'm making this video, hopefully get a few more eyes on our findings. But what did we do? We identified a problem, asked the literature how to help, asked the experts how to help, with the idea where they overlap would be our best bang for our buck. Our problem was shoulder injury. We can see up to 50% of swimmers at any single point in time report shoulder pain. But over a 1 month period, we had 91% of Aussie juniors say they had sore shoulders, and over one season, 97% of college swimmers said they had shoulder pain at some point. And it's not just a little bit of shoulder pain. Every Olympics, we have medalists retire with poor shoulder health. Essentially, fish swim, birds fly, and swimmers hurt their shoulders. There's our problem. Let's ask the literature, how can we help? And the way we did that, well, we got to figure out what's causing these injuries. So we did a systematic review on shoulder and pain and injury risk factors in competitive swimmers. We didn't have any high quality studies, 11 acceptable quality, 11 borderline quality, and we rejected 2 for being unacceptable. It's important not to blame the researchers here. It's pretty hard to control things in high performance sport. If we can't control it, we can't do high quality research. For each risk factor, we were able to categorize with a certain level of evidence, being strong, moderate, or limited evidence, or conflicting means we have no idea. And it was either yes, associated, or no, not associated with shoulder injury. We had 80 different variables assessed, but over half of them had limited opposing evidence, so we think they're not important. We had about a quarter could be associated with shoulder injury, some conflicting, we had no idea. Pretty sure a few of them were not associated with shoulder injury, and we only had 2 that we're pretty sure are associated with shoulder injury. These were competitive level, but that was non-directional, which just means different squads have different injury rates. We also had muscle activity patterns, but that's only been assessed in cross-sectional studies. Just means if you've got a sore shoulder, you use your shoulder differently. If you've got a sore ankle, you'll walk differently. Doesn't tell us anything about what's causing the injury. So literature didn't give us much. Let's ask the experts the same question, see where we overlap. And we're lucky enough to have this research supported by the best academy of swimming in the world, the QAS and Swimming Australia. We took a concept mapping approach, which is basically 3 steps: brainstorm, sort, and rate. We had 27 experts contribute to one of those phases, mostly physios, strength coaches, but we did have a good mix of everyone. We define as expert as anyone currently working with open level national swimmers or at least 2 years prior experience. Step 1 was brainstorming. So we sent out an online survey and we asked these experts, based on your experience, what specific risk factors do you believe are contributing to shoulder injury in swimmers? They could write as many or as few ideas as they want, and you can see the ideas pop up here. I don't think they were reading these old ideas because we had 124 contributed risk factors. We were able then to filter that down into 61 unique proposed risk factors by removing duplicates, combining similar responses. Step 2 was sorting. So for each one of those 61 risk factors on the side, we asked them to click and drag them, drop them into different piles based on their content. So you can see that first pile I've made, I've labeled strength, so I'm going to pop all my strength variables in there. This next one I've called pool training, all my pool training variables are in there. This one I haven't quite figured out what to do with yet. We asked them to aim for about 5 to 20 different piles. These are the results. Each dot is one of those 61 risk factors. The closer they are together, the more people grouped them together. We had a stress value of 0.18, which means this is a pretty good map of what most participants said. We can start looking around at different clusters now. So we've got an injury history cluster all by itself. We had a few range of motion variables, motor control, strength, land training variables, pool training variables, and some biopsychosocial factors. But the important part was a rating. So we asked participants for each one of those 61 risk factors, how important is it to include in injury prevention protocols? They just go through 1 to 10, most to least, or least to most important. We asked them to do the exact same thing for how modifiable, how easy is it to change? And these are the results. On the x-axis here is the mean importance rating, y-axis is mean modifiable. So these ones are really important, these ones are really easy to change. Each dot is one of those 61 risk factors. Let's start in the golden zone up here. We can see inconsistent training load, stroke technique, a strength measure, and some strength endurance measures. Down here, really important, but probably can't change them. Injury history, it makes sense, moving on. Down here, probably no-no zone for injury prevention, because it's not so important, probably can't change it. I was surprised to see range of motion there, some range of motion variables at least, stroke specialty and DOMs. Finally, these aren't so important, but we can probably change them, like max strength. And this isn't to say they're not important for performance, just injury prevention. Okay, now we've asked the literature, we've asked the experts, let's mash them together. Hopefully we get some overlap. This is what happens when you mash them together. You can see expert opinion, so that x-axis there is the mean importance rating, with each bar graph being one of those 61 risk factors. Over here we've got our systematic review finding, with the x-axis here being the level of evidence, so supporting evidence in green, opposing evidence in red. If we zoom in here, we can see inconsistent training load and acute increases in swim training load, both aligned with a limited amount of supporting evidence in the acute on chronic workload ratio in 201 swimmers. Now we're not going to open this can of worms right here, you either love it or hate it. You can see other variables like posterior shoulder strength endurance was highly important, above the mean importance, and we did have some supporting evidence. If we look a bit further down, we can see generalized rotator cuff strength endurance has some evidence to support external, but not internal rotation, which is why it's conflicting evidence. But down here it gets a bit dicey. It's dicey because we've got some strength range of motion variables, which experts said are above the mean importance, so pretty important, even though we've got limited and moderate amount of evidence saying, no, these things aren't associated with shoulder injury. So there's our gap. Problem is, we don't know who's right. Your guess is as good as mine. But what do we do about it? So swim support staff, we should probably look at things that are highly important and highly modifiable, but also those ones with supporting evidence. And we had 3 different risk factors fit this criteria. Inconsistent training load and poor stroke technique. I don't really think it's my job to tell a swimmer how to swim or how much to swim, so we're brainstorming, how can we help this problem? So we've started developing this, what we're calling a digital swimmer, which is just a neuromusculoskeletal model of someone swimming. With the end idea, this is definitely better at measuring kinematics than a GoPro camera, and eventually we can measure individual tissue loads. Unfortunately at this point, our male model had to be strapped up with about $50,000 worth of kit, so it's probably not going to make its way to a pool near you anytime soon, but we are working on it. What can everyone else do? Well, the posterior shoulder strength endurance seems to be one of the key things that everyone can do. The idea being that the posterior shoulder can help center the humeral head in the shoulder joint for a long session. And the way that the literature tends to monitor that over time is this test. Hold 2% body weight in your hand, hold it either up, lay face down, how long can you hold it above the ground? Or if you hold it off a plinth, how many repetitions can you go? Researchers, what should we do? Well, I think this is a pretty good method. If you've got a practical problem, the literature doesn't give you much, ask the experts and gives you a clear direction where to go next. And it's clear we need to collaborate more. Do what the experts think is important. We need to disseminate this research, otherwise it's all a waste of time, and we need more prospective studies. Cross-sectional studies don't give us the ability to infer causation, and therefore we're basically guessing.